So in seminary, I was youth minister at a new church start in Broken Arrow, and we got to the summer and we decided that we needed to take a mission trip and we needed to take that into some foreign territory, a different culture, if you will. So we left Broken Arrow and we came to South Oklahoma City. Now, I understand that this is culture to y'all, but anything that is a foreign culture to us means we're a foreign culture to them. And trust me, during that time in Broken Arrow, anything that wasn't Broken Arrow was kind of a foreign culture to the people that I was in ministry with. Our task that week was to paint a woman's house. An older lady, she had a son who worked, couldn't do some of the work around her house, and so we agreed to come and paint her house. And the last day, day 3, when we just started, the woman came up and she had a request. She asked, would you paint a door for me? And I told her that our priority was to paint the house, but if we had enough paint left over, we'd be more than happy to paint the door for her. And so we continued our work through the day. It was obvious we were going to finish the house and have enough paint, so I went and told her, I said, okay, we're going to be able to do this. Where's this door that you would like for us to paint? And she said, well, it's out here in my storage shed. And so we walked out to the storage shed, and let me just say that she had a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of stuff that she would never use. A lot of stuff that if she had a garage sale, it wouldn't have brought in a lot of money. But we were looking at her stuff, and she said, okay, there's the door. And you know exactly where the door was in this storage shed, right? It's on the back wall. And all the stuff was pushed up against it. I mean, plywood and paneling, and it was going to take some work to, get this door out. But got in there and dug around and, got the door out and was getting ready to paint it. And then she had another request. Although this time it wasn't as much a request as it was a demand. She said, when you finish painting it, this is where I want you to hang it. And so I had to explain to her that I didn't have any tools, that I would not be able to hang the door, but we'd be glad to paint it and her son could hang it later. And she said, no, that's just go ahead and put it back if you can't paint it. Okay, no sweat. Well, actually, there was a lot of sweat because it was early July when we were doing all this work. And so I got the door and I just put it back in the storage shed. And she said, oh, no. Put it back where it was. Now, as I said, this woman had a lot of stuff. And I tried to reason with her. I tried to explain it to her that if we left it out, that the person who was going to paint and hang the door for her wouldn't have to struggle through that it was a lot of work getting the door out. But there was no amount of reason and there was no amount of logic that was going to work with her. And when you're leading teenagers, sometimes you learn the best way to handle this is simply to smile and say, yes, ma'am. And so that's what I did. But as you could likely tell, it was a very frustrating experience for me. Now, that fall, when I went back to school, we had a class where we had to do what we called critical incident reports, where we had to tell something we did in ministry and why it was frustrating to us and all this. And so I told that story. And I remember the facilitator of our class saying, have you ever worked with old people? Now, at 23 years old, I had been around grandparents and aunts and uncles and people in my church, but I hadn't really worked with a lot of retired senior citizen type of people. And he said, here's what you'll want to know about this in the future. And I've always remembered this. Y'all can judge whether or not this is true. He said, sometimes older people want things done in a certain way because they want to maintain a sense of control about their lives that they feel like they're losing. Now, I will confess to you that a statement I frequently make about myself is this: the older I get, the more order I need in my universe. Do I have a witness this morning? I don't really even need to ask that question, because when Pastor Stephanie's given the mission moment, she said, I decided to do my Christmas decorations different this year. I decided to prepare them with next Christmas in mind. I'm like, She's getting older. She needs more order in her universe. That's what's going on here. But this is one of the things that we learn about creation and about this idea that we have create is when God created, God did create with order. I love how Pastor Stephanie introduced last week. Our theme for the year, our word for the year is create. And out in the entrance, if you haven't grabbed one of those clings that says create on it, a cling is the non-adhesive stuff that will stick to surfaces. Help yourself to some of those. I actually have one on my mirror in my office so that when people come and look in my mirror, they're always going to see that because I really don't look in the mirror that much. But at home, I do look in the mirror a lot, and it's on my mirror, and it reminds me to pray for the church when I see that word create. And Pastor Stephanie did a great job last week introducing the idea. And one of the things I really loved was how she talked about the ancient Hebrew understanding of what creation was like. Kind of a prequel, if you will, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created. We could leave it there because that tells us a lot. But it says that the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, I never really thought about that till this week, but it wasn't over the water. The waters, it was plural. And she talked about how there was a higher level and there was a middle level, and then there was that lower level called the primordial deep. And the primordial deep was a place that the Hebrews believed was characterized by darkness and chaos. Chaos, a.k.a. disorder. So when we look at the stories of creation, we will see that order is a big part of what God does. And I want us to look at the creation story for day one. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. And evening passed and morning came, marking the first day. Brothers and sisters, this is the word of the Lord. So when it comes to reading the creation story, one of the things that we want to acknowledge, because we know this to be true, is that not everybody believes this is how the world was created. There is debate, there is sometimes even hostile arguing over how the universe was created. Now, as a Christian, if you ask me, how did creation happen, I'm going to say, well, God created ex nihilo. That's what they taught us in seminary. Ex nihilo is Latin. It means out of nothing. So in other words, God didn't grab some grass and grab some dirt and grab some rocks and make deserts and mountains, and he didn't grab some water and make an ocean. He didn't have substances that he grabbed. God created ex nihilo, and he created it by the power of his spoken word. In other words, God said, "Let there be light," and by God, there was. That was how it worked. God just spoke, and things came into being. This is a doctrine that we believe by faith. We cannot prove it. We can argue it, but we cannot prove it. It's a doctrine that we accept because of our faith. But there are other ideas of this, and the most popular and easiest one for us to consider this morning is the idea of science that is trying to figure out how the world and how the universe was created. And the most popular theory among the theories of that would be the one made even more popular by a sitcom. It's the Big Bang Theory. You know, the whole universe was in a dark, dense state. And now some of y'all are singing the theme song to that show in your head. But here's the thing about science. Science has a method that it uses to prove and verify things. And by using scientific method, you cannot prove Genesis 1:1. It doesn't work that way. Now, I'm not going to rage into the depth of the debate because that's not the point I want to make. The point I want to make is when we think about creation, we must know that the biblical writings are not meant to be a science textbook. The biblical writings are a theological textbook. In other words, the Bible is written to tell the story of God. And so when we read the creation story, part of the question that we're asking is the question, what does this tell us about God? Pardon me. So the question I have when I think of day one is this: why did God create light first? Now, I have a hunch if you were to be teaching a small children's Sunday school class and you were to ask them that question, why do you think God created light first? The answer that you're most likely to hear is, well, that way God could see to create everything else he was going to make. Because whenever we do work, whenever we, maybe we're creating a painting, maybe it's cross-stitching or knitting or crocheting or maybe it's woodwork or maybe you're working on a car, what's one of the primary rules for creating things? You have to have adequate lighting in order to be able to see clearly when you're doing this. And so I could see a child saying, well, that way God could see everything else he was creating. Well, I'm pretty certain that's not the answer. But I will also share with you that in answering my own question, I don't have the slightest idea why God created light first. I can't really say that I completely understand the mind of God and why God created light first. I only know that it says that's what God created first. And as a result of that, since this is a theological textbook telling us about God, then I would have to say that light is the first revelation of what God is like. We find this idea all through Scripture. Isaiah the prophet, when he's writing about what God is speaking to the people, he says, the people are walking in darkness. Now that's what this says. God had light and darkness. He said the people are walking in darkness. And what he means by this is people are separated from God. Because of their sin, because of the way they were living, they were separated from God. And so the prophecy is the people who are walking in darkness will see a great light. They will see a revelation of God. And then John, the Apostle John, when he is writing his narrative of the life of Jesus that we call the Gospel of John, when he's talking about Jesus coming into the world, he doesn't talk about shepherds and angels and stars and magi. He doesn't talk about all that stuff that we sing about during the season of Advent and Christmas. No, John writes it like this. He said, the light has come into the world and the darkness has not overcome it, which you might recognize as how we close out every candlelight Christmas Eve service. Light has come into the world and the darkness has not overcome it. This is a revelation of who God is. And even Jesus, and we read this in John's gospel, Jesus says about himself, I am the light of the world. Whenever God is revealing something about himself, light is the first thing God reveals. And we know that the only reason we can know God is because God has chosen to reveal himself to us. And so when God created light, and this is a revelation of who God is, this means that we begin to understand something of the nature and the character of who God is and how God is going to relate to people. This was the first thing that God did to show us who he was. With small children, we can talk about how the invisible, unseen spirit hovered above the face of the waters, and it's possible to explain that to them, but it can be a little bit difficult. But they understand light. They understand darkness. And one of the things that we would say is light is an observable part of creation that we can see, but light is also a symbol of life and salvation. Now, I've got to say, I don't know if this is the best way that I can explain this, but this is going to be my favorite way to explain this. Y'all just going to have to bear with me on this, okay? When I see that statement, light is a symbol of life and salvation, it immediately takes my mind to my favorite television show. My favorite television show is Survivor. I love watching Survivor. Now, I know some of you out there, you're like, I have never watched Survivor in my life. That's okay. We can still be friends. And I know some of you may have watched Survivor some, but you don't watch it anymore. I want you to know that I didn't start season 1 like other people. I got into it late, and my wife and I shared this addiction to watching Survivor. Now, since then, she's gone through rehab. She worked her 12 steps, and she's not addicted to Survivor anymore, but it doesn't really bother her too much that I am, and we still like each other. We can still be friends, but let me tell you why this reminds me of Survivor. Are y'all with me so far? Some of y'all looking bored. I just need to... Okay, so... I'm not going to explain the premise of Survivor to you. You have to watch if you want to know. But when it's a game and you're in a tribe and your tribe has to vote people out when you lose parts of the game, and when you go to tribal council to vote someone out, the first time you go, they give them a torch, and the host, Jeff Probst, will say, okay, dip your torch in the fire, and this is a great statement, because fire means life in Survivor. And then whenever somebody is voted out of the game, they have to take their torch and put it there, and Probst will take a snuffer, and he will snuff the flame out, and he will say, the tribe has spoken. That's the end of the game for you, and you now have to exit tribal council by walking into darkness. Light is this symbol of God, and to be people that walk in darkness, as Isaiah said it, to be in darkness is to be people who are living separated from light. It's to be people who live with our own willfulness. Now again, with small children, you can explain the spirit hovering above the waters. It's different, but children understand the difference between light and dark. In fact, most really small children are afraid of the dark. And in order to calm them that it's all going to be okay, what do parents do? We put in a night light. And I think that can be a great way of teaching children about God. That even in the midst of darkness, you can be calm. And you do not have to be afraid, because this light reminds you that God is present with you. Light is a revelation of who God is and what God is like. And light is a symbol of our life and our salvation, that no matter what kind of darkness we experience, no matter what kind of chaos and disorder we may choose in our lives, God chooses to bring order and salvation to us. Ooh, that's a good word right there. That's a good word. Because sometimes we also remember what John said, and we have to give witness that sometimes this is true for us. In his gospel, John said, light has come into darkness, and darkness has not overcome it. But in a letter that he writes to the early church, John writes this. He said, if we, because he's talking to first century believers, if we are in the light as he is in the light, then we have fellowship with one another. That's what it writes in 1 John chapter 1. But go over a few more chapters in chapter 3, and John defines the problem. He says, but the problem is that people love darkness rather than light. Ooh. People love darkness rather than light. That means people choose to be separated from God. And people choose chaos and disorder in life instead of choosing the intimacy that God has created the universe with. Hiram knew that. Hiram was a young man that was born during the Depression years. His life had lots of ups and downs. And his father was someone that during the Depression was probably pretty fortunate to still have a job and still get paid, but he had to work long, hard hours, and he wasn't really an influence in his son's life. And so Hiram grew up not really having a father's presence in his life, but he also had a spinal condition, and it caused him great pain, and he couldn't be active the way children tend to be active, and that means when other kids were outside playing and doing things, a lot of times Hiram was left out, and he was left alone. And for entertainment, he would listen to the radio, and he liked music, and so he learned how to play guitar, and he By the time he was a teenager, about 13 years old, the local radio station would have him come and play his guitar and sing songs on the radio. He just loved doing that. When he graduated from high school, he decided he wanted to be a singer and songwriter. We can only imagine what a difficult way that is to make a living in your life, to write and sell music, and yet he was doing pretty good at it. He wrote some songs that some other people sang, and then he began to get invited to come and play concerts in different places. So he was doing that, but the pain it caused his body was a real struggle. And so he self-medicated. He self-medicated with alcohol. He became an alcoholic in his 20s. Somehow or another, he met a woman, he fell in love, they got married. The marriage didn't last. They ended in divorce, and part of the reason probably that his marriage didn't last is as his pain increased from his travels, so did his self-medication, only now he wasn't just using alcohol, he was using morphine. One night, he was coming home from a concert. He was passed out drunk in the back seat. His mother was driving. They neared their hometown of Montgomery, Alabama, and as they were getting near town, she just wanted him to know they were getting close. He goes, I know we're getting close because I can see the lights at the airport to let me know that we're getting close to Montgomery. And the next morning, Hiram got up and he wrote a song about that. That's what he was. He was a singer and a songwriter, and the song that he wrote is a song that we love to sing here at St. Andrews. It's a song that we sing a couple of times a year, and it's a song that has a good beat and a good rhythm and a good feel to it. The song is called I Saw the Light, written by Hiram Williams, that everybody called Hank. Hank Williams had a life of ups and downs. Praise the Lord, he saw the light. He died at 29 years old. When we choose darkness rather than light, it separates us from God. It causes our lives to begin to spin and begin to spiral into the chaos, into the disorder of this world. And we know what that's like. Sometimes we have chosen darkness instead of light, and at that point we realize that we need to repent, we need to turn away from that, and we need to come and we need to come to this God who promises us life and salvation. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me at all if people in here right now are thinking, you don't know the darkness I'm struggling with. Well, you're right, I don't. God does. So if God's speaking to you, I encourage you to listen. Maybe you're living in a place where there's just trouble in your family. Maybe your marriage is suffering in chaos. Maybe your kids, your grandkids, they're just rejecting you and they're stirring up trouble. Maybe you're an addict, or you live with an addict. Maybe you are at a place where you feel like there's no hope for your situation. You are who you are. Even if you're in darkness, this is who you're going to be. I want to speak a good word to you. It's an easy word to remember. It's an easy word to understand. God is still light. That's the first way God reveals himself to us. And because it is a symbol of life and salvation, we do well to know and we do well to understand that light has come into the world and darkness cannot overcome it. One of the things I love that Pastor Stephanie shared last week is such a great word, where she said, there is no problem we have that God does not have a creative solution for. So whatever our struggles are, whatever our darkness is, God has a creative solution for this. Let me tell you why I believe this. Because the children of Israel were confronted by the Red Sea on one side, and Pharaoh's army was coming behind them, and they were trapped. And God has a creative solution for that. You know the story. He opens up the sea so the people can walk on dry land, and then they're separated from Pharaoh's army, who doesn't get the same kind of toll pass at that point. We can think of Daniel, a man of God who would never deny his faith nor his relationship with God. And when he was tricked into a conspiracy that would kill him, and he is thrown into a pit full of hungry lions, God had a creative way of shutting the mouths of those lions, so Daniel came out unscathed. And when John said that light is coming to the world and the darkness has not overcome it, it's not that darkness didn't try. They hung him on a cross, they killed him, they put him in a grave, and on the third day, he rose again, because darkness cannot overcome light. Brothers and sisters, God is still light. Whatever our struggle, whatever chaos and disorder we may experience in life, the older I get, the more order I need. And I always trust that God's going to make a way, because that's who God is. He's a way maker, a miracle worker, a promise keeper. He is light in the darkness. Would you pray with me? Lord Jesus,